Thanks for that great introduction. I really appreciate it. I hate talking about myself, so. But yes, thanks for having me. My name is Emily. So I want to start with some fun owl facts. So the northern spotted owl is one of 3 recognized subspecies, but it's the only subspecies that's found in Washington. So it diverged or became genetically distinct from the other subspecies, which are the California and Mexican spotted owl, about 115 to 125,000 years ago. They eat primarily flying squirrels and wood rats in our area of Washington, and the oldest spotted owl ever recorded was 21 years old, although I found one in Olympic National Park that was 23 years old based on the banding data. He was very sleepy. So great horned owls and northern goshawks are natural predators of spotted owls. Spotted owls typically form monogamous, lifelong pair bonds. Sometimes things don't work out and they do find another partner, but typically it's the same pair. And they're important because scientists use them as an indicator or sentinel species for evaluating the health of old growth forests. So not every species makes a good indicator species. Usually we use indicator species that have very specific criteria for their life history. So they require very clean water, or they eat just like a select, they have a very restricted diet, something like that. So that way it makes it easy to kind of see where this canary in a coal mine, where these like shifts happen. So the spotted owl was first listed as endangered in Washington by the Fish and Wildlife Commission, Washington Fish and Wildlife Commission in 1988. And it was listed as federally threatened by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 1990. Some of you may remember the timber wars. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service concluded in their last review that uplisting spotted owls from threatened to endangered was warranted, but they had to prioritize other work and decided that the protections for the species were adequate until the next review, which is next year. So in 2023, the Fish and Wildlife Commission agreed with our recommendation to keep the species listed as endangered. Factors that are currently limiting the spotted owl are competition with barred owls, habitat loss due to climate change, and then also fire risks in dry forests on the east side. The adequacy of species protections, and then also just challenges with having a small and vulnerable and fragmented population. In this figure, a population is stable if it has a rate of change that's equal to 1. The annual rate of population change continues to decline significantly in all of the spotted owl study areas. And the greatest declines are in Washington, where monitoring has occurred for over 26 or 31 years. And there were 3 study areas in Washington, which is the Clay Island Ranger District, Mount Rainier National Park, and Olympic National Park. So between 1995 and 2017, the estimated population size at Mount Rainier dropped nearly 75%, and the decline at both Clay Island and Olympic National Park exceeded 80%. So without intervention, we can expect spotted owls to be functionally extirpated from Washington within a decade. So functional extirpation means that they are no longer playing a role in the ecosystem because their numbers are too low. It's essentially extinction. WDFW is taking a 3-pronged approach to recovering spotted owls in Washington. This includes maintaining habitat, population augmentation, and then barred owl management. So the science indicates that we must do all 3 of these things together to save spotted owls in Washington. We have limited tools to protect spotted owl habitat. The impacts of timber harvest have been reduced but not eliminated. At the local level, we have state land use plans. We also have habitat conservation plans on the federal level and conservation benefit agreements. At the federal level, critical habitat was designated for spotted owls by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. However, that can fluctuate based on the administration. So there was a reduction in critical habitat during the first Trump administration, and then that was reversed during the Biden administration, for example. The state has these special spotted owl special emphasis areas, and they provide protections to spotted owl habitat that are based around these spotted owl activity sites, so where there were historically nests. The Northwest Forest Plan is working to reduce habitat loss. Between 1993 and 2017, nesting and roosting forests on federal land experienced a net increase overall. And this was despite losses due to wildfire and timber harvest and other disturbances. But these numbers are dated, and wildfire continues to grow into a much bigger threat to spotted owl habitat on the east side of the Cascades than in other areas like on the western side of the Cascades or in Olympic National Park. So despite these gains, spotted owl populations declined by 61.8% range-wide, and this was largely due to displacement by invasive barred owls. Barred owls have become so dense throughout spotted owl territory that even with ongoing habitat protections on federal lands, spotted owls might not survive long-term without extra help. So the bottom line is the science suggests that we can't grow enough habitat to stop barred owls and spotted owls from competing. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service concluded that barred owls in Western North America meet the definition of an invasive species. They're not native to the West Coast. They were unintentionally introduced through human-related activities. They cause significant environmental harm. Barred owls are also likely harming other species through predation and competition and are considered a risk to ecosystem stability in some forest ecosystems. And I'll explain this more in detail. So according to the IUCN Red List of threatened species, invasive species are one of the top causes of biodiversity loss and the second most common cause of species extinctions. So for example, in this photo, there's the, I'm afraid to touch a button, it's the bird, the photo of the Guam kingfisher, and then there's a photo of an invasive brown tree snake. So brown tree, this is a classic example. Brown tree snakes were brought to Guam in US military cargo in the 1940s. The snake caused the extinction of 10 out of 12 of the forest birds. These were species that were found nowhere else in the world. And the other two species are functionally extinct. The remaining Guam kingfishers were brought into captivity and were in captivity from the 80s until a couple years ago when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service released them on Palmyra Atoll. So this is an introduction to an island that they're not native to. There was a environmental assessment to make sure that they were not going to cause harm to the species there. But this, they're reproducing. It's really fun to watch. You can see they have like an Instagram page for it. So this success gives us hope that one day we can bring Guam kingfishers back home to Guam. So the extinction of the bird population on Guam robbed the indigenous Chamorro people of their natural history, and it drastically altered the native vegetation due to this loss of their pollinators and seed dispersers. Invasive species are not only limited to those that are directly introduced by people. So shifting ranges of native species due to anthropogenic activities and climate change over a short period of time. Now, remember I said spotted owls evolved into their own subspecies 115 to 125,000 years ago. So we're talking short periods of time, less than 100 years. So these invaders can have negative effects on native populations. And the species may also be considered invasive even if it's a range expansion, depending on how they're interacting with the new environment. Species that are most similar to the invader are the most at risk. So that means when an invader is a congeneric or in the same genus of a native species, there can be exploitative competition, increased rates of hybridization, there can be parasite and disease transmission. We see this where barred owls have a smaller parasite load than spotted owls because they didn't co-evolve with the parasites here. Or there can be behavioral or adaptive changes. And so an example of this in the US is the range expansion of the southern flying squirrel into the northern flying squirrel range. And these impacts can be especially detrimental to native species that are already struggling. So barred owls are native to eastern North America, east of the Great Plains and south of the US-Canadian border. And historically, the Great Plains provided a natural barrier to barred owl expansion into western North America. So the anthropogenic impact of European colonizers allowed barred owls to expand their range through fire suppression, herbivore overhunting and extirpation, riparian forest establishment, and then tree planting. And so it created this this forest that barred owls were able to move through. And that put them in conflict with spotted owls. So the first barred owl was documented. This is a dot map of observations of barred owls throughout the years. So you can kind of see the range invasion in action. Barred owls were first documented in Washington in 54 years ago in 1972. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service acknowledged them as a threat to spotted owl recovery 18 years ago in 2008. So barred owls make spotted owl habitat inaccessible to them and unviable for their recovery. Barred owl interference and competition is the greatest direct factor that's driving the current and continued population decline of spotted owls. And it may undermine the positive effects of conservation actions like habitat protections. In areas where both species occur, barred owl competition increases spotted owl extinction rates, it decreases spotted owl colonization rates, and it decreases spotted owl occupancy and survival rates. So you can see in this figure, these are the demography study areas that I mentioned before, Cle Elum, Rainier, and Olympic. You can see as the one or more barred owl detections goes up or occupancy goes up in the orange line, you can see the spotted owl occupancy declines. Barred owls are not the ecological equivalent of spotted owls in forest ecosystems. They're not a replacement for spotted owls because they're not filling the same role in the ecosystem. They occupy a greater diversity of habitats, so you'll see them in your backyard, meadows, swamps, riparian areas, and therefore a wider range of prey species may be affected. As a generalist novel predator, they capture a greater proportion of diurnal prey, so you'll see them out during the day. They capture a wider variety of terrestrial prey and aquatic prey than northern spotted owls. And they are likely exerting a novel predation pressure on species that aren't typically spotted owl prey. Smaller home ranges allow them to occur on a landscape at a density that's 8 to 10 times that of the historical population of northern spotted owls. So you could fit 8 to 10 times the number of barred owls in one spotted owl territory. So you can imagine 8 to 10 times the predation pressure. They also have more young than spotted owls, and they breed every year. And they can have 2 to 3 young per year. Spotted owls will breed maybe every year. It used to be like every other year when I was working in the Park Service. So just for reference, these are the morphological differences between the two species. You can see if you see the biggest thing is if you see them from the front, you can see the barring where they get their name. And from the back, you can kind of see that there's more white streaks. But for me, it's really the face. There's always that picture of barred owls looking over their shoulder at you, and you can see their face is much whiter than spotted owls. So moving on to what are we talking about when we say that they're a trophic cascade risk? Some of you may be familiar with the studies on trophic cascades that were actually done in Washington. So this was a hypothesis, a theory. There was research that was done here in Washington. When sea otters were removed, it caused an overgrowth of sea urchins, and they ate down the kelp forest. We're still having problems with this. And then that completely altered the kelp ecosystems. So increased barred owl densities have the potential to exert enough predation and competitive pressure to cause new species listings. So this is the same thing. Instead of removing an apex predator, we are inserting a novel predator, and we can get the same disruption of ecosystems. As a new predator and competitor in Western forests, the impact of barred owls is likely more serious for species that are rare or at risk because they destabilize the food webs. They could be causing major changes, and potentially new uplistings could occur. Novel predators can lower carrying capacity of an area for competitors, and they can force diet shifts or shifts in habitat use. So if they eat all of something's prey that they need to survive, not all prey is equal. You got to eat a lot more birds to get the same caloric value of eating one squirrel. But if there aren't any squirrels around, you're going to have to spend all of your energy eating birds. So there might be a diet shift that's detrimental to their survival, or they may be shifting in habitat use. And we saw this with spotted owls in the park, where they would be moving higher into less desirable, less suitable habitat, higher up the slope. So Native mesopredators may also be directly or indirectly impacted through predation or interference competition. And then like prey species, they may be avoiding areas that have barred owls. If this is happening, it would be especially relevant to reintroduction efforts. So specialist predators are more at risk because they only eat a few prey species. And so this could be detrimental to, say, our fisher reintroduction effort. Predation and competition with other owls is slowly being documented. Two long-term studies documented screech owl disappearance in areas where barred owl densities have increased. A 2021 Western screech owl study on distribution and potential threats in the Pacific Northwest noted that their Western screech owl detection slightly dropped where barred owls were present. They occupied sites that were used by barred owls, but they occurred even less frequently in older forests. And this suggests that screech owls may be experiencing higher predation risk in old forests. The study, like I said, suggests that screech owls are unable to avoid habitats that are used by barred owls because they're everywhere. Western screech owls and northern saw-whet owls have also been found in barred owl gut contents. Barred owls have been documented preying on great gray owls too in the Midwest. A 2025 study in Sierra Nevada found that flemmulated owl occupancy increased twofold in areas that had lethal barred owl removals. So it may not just be spotted owls that are benefiting from barred owl removals. Many of our species of greatest conservation need face threats that are similar to spotted owls. They have small populations that are susceptible to factors that may not affect larger populations that can take the hit. Adaptability to novel predators varies with species, and this can be based on factors like population size, geographic distribution, genetic diversity, and then also local adaptations. And so for these reasons, even opportunistic predation may be especially impactful to endangered or threatened species. Small mammals with limited distribution, like northern flying squirrels and pocket gophers and wood rats, may be especially susceptible to increases in predation rates. And most sensitive species have small population sizes, and so they may lack genetic variation. And then this limited genetic diversity can translate into a lack of adaptive potential to survive novel stressors, such as increased rates of predation. And then additionally, species may be displaced into habitats that are favored by other predators. So this is an example of some species that are found in barred owl prey studies. Some of these are hypothesized interactions and then based on like similar life histories to what's already been found. But some of these species have been found in gut contents, like I said, like screech owls and western gray squirrels and pocket gophers. So in 2025, there was a study that found that barred owls consume 162 vertebrates and invertebrate prey species. This included 29 species that had federal or state level conservation status. So this was a range-wide study. This was Washington, Oregon, and California. And this suggests that barred owls may threaten smaller native predators through competition and for shared prey. And it may further imperil amphibian communities that are already threatened by a suite of stressors. And this is because about 30% of their diet was perps. And then this is another example, just one example of a barred owl diet study that found species of greatest conservation need in gut contents. So special status species for our state are highlighted in green, and they include endangered western gray squirrels, pocket gophers, and snakes. And many similar species to other species of greatest conservation need have been found. And so ones that we have in the state that are analogous to these ones that were found in this diet study are in yellow. And then because barred owls present a novel predation pressure on common species like flying squirrels that I've highlighted in pink, they may cause local declines of those common species. Over 17 species that provide ecosystem services in our forests have been found in barred owl diets. Tree and shrub growth may be impacted with increased predation pressure on seed dispersing rodents and frugivorous birds. Over 7 frugivorous species have been found in the diets of barred owls. That's birds like the van-tailed pigeon. Squirrels are important spore dispersers of mycorrhizal fungi. Therefore, increased predation could reduce recruitment of old growth forests by interrupting those essential mycorrhizal communities. And then that can in turn inhibit growth rates and recruitment rates. And additionally, a decrease in burrowing small mammal populations could impact the decomposition rates of organic matter in litter. So in 2008, like I said, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service listed spotted owls as a threat, or listed barred owls as a threat in the Spotted Owl Recovery Plan. And an assessment of potential methods to manage the competitive interactions concluded that the most effective method would be removals. So other considerations included reproductive interference or translocations. And when I say reproductive interference, I mean like destroying nests and eggs or sterilizing adults. And this was dismissed because the population would only decline after the territorial birds died and recolonization declined. And like I said, these birds can live into their 20s. And during that time, native wildlife would still be impacted. It would be difficult to find nests, and capture and sterilization would be stressful and unethical to essentially torture those wild birds. Non-lethal removal methods were also evaluated, like releasing the birds into other areas in the West, but this was dismissed due to the impacts on native wildlife, and they often return to their territories. So they've been documented being moved and returning up to 100 miles so far has been documented. Translocating the birds back to their native range in the east was dismissed due to the potential for disease transmission and a disruption of the genetic variation that's happening on the East Coast with those birds. And also, they just lack empty habitat. Barred owls are doing really well on the East Coast. So we know that if barred owls are left unmanaged, spotted owls will be extirpated from the state. But how do we know that barred owl management works? In 2013, the service initiated the barred owl removal experiment in Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. And it's a BACI study, or a before-after control impact study. And this is often considered the gold standard when investigating impacts of a treatment, because it compares data collected before and after the intervention at both an impacted and a control site. So the experiment paired barred owl removal areas with control areas with no removals to assess the removal impact on spotted owl populations. So barred owl removal strongly improved spotted owl survival. It moderately boosted dispersal and recruitment because a lot of our birds are just old and reaching reproductive senescence. And then in treatment areas, populations stabilized within 3 to 6 years, while control areas saw a 12% annual decline. And this removal work was tested at a larger scale in California, where lethal controls across 50,000 kilometers squared in California had removal efforts. So this was about 1/3 of the state's barred owl population. And this stabilized spotted owl populations, and it halted barred owl establishment. So these results demonstrate that barred owl removals are an effective conservation method, and they are feasible at larger scales. So removals also enable other management actions, like creating research opportunities to evaluate other native species and the impacts of barred owls. Spotted owls are one of the most studied birds in the world. And so they, like I said, they serve as a sentinel species for old growth ecosystems. Spotted owl occupancy benefits other species because it protects old growth forests. A lot of our forest protections are based on occupancy of spotted owls or assumed occupancy of spotted owls. And so barred owl removals in those ecosystems will benefit other species. Additionally, we can use barred owl management areas to continue researching barred owl impacts on other species. We may find that we may need to manage barred owls where we've made other conservation investments, like I said, like fisher reintroductions or western pond turtle release sites. Most of what we know about barred owl impacts to other species are because of the removal experiments that happened in spotted owl habitat. So we need to study barred owl impacts to species in other ecosystems as well, not just old growth forests. There are many examples of using native wildlife removals as a management tool. One success story is the Kirtland's warbler that was able to be delisted after 47 years of conservation work. Initially, management of native brown-headed cowbirds was used to protect the warbler nests against nest parasitism. Eventually, the level of management was able to be reduced, and finally, the species recovered enough for management to no longer be needed. In this state, another example are American bullfrogs, which are an aquatic invasive species in Washington, and they're the primary driver of declines of our native herp species. They eat everything. WDFW recently made some heavy investments in bullfrog control, and we're seeing the incredible difference that it can make. So monitoring in our demography study areas in Washington indicates that spotted owl abundance has declined to very low numbers, and it seems almost certain that effective recovery will require both barred owl management and augmentation of the spotted owl population. We have so few owls that we really need more of a boost to our population to really jumpstart it. So in British Columbia, they have a northern spotted owl breeding program, and it's the only breeding program for spotted owls in the world. And they have over 30 owls in captivity. It's been they've been perfecting husbandry techniques such as double clutching and chick fostering, and the program has been steadily progressing to the point of releasing spotted owls. So I went to BC in June and watched the release of 6 birds on the Spasm Nation land, and I had the privilege of talking with some of the Spasm Nation tribal members, and they consider spotted owls their ancestors, and so it was giving them back a piece of their natural heritage and their cultural heritage. So WDFW conducted an augmentation feasibility assessment, and it evaluated conservation breeding or head starting techniques and conservation translocations as a recovery tool. So we completed that study last year, and the study concluded that translocations are ecologically feasible now, but that could change in the future because, like I said, our population is declining at an alarming rate. So we still have options and time to take meaningful actions to recover the species. In all of the simulations, barred owl management greatly improved the success of the actions. We also tested it without management. So some of my final thoughts are that biologists have arrived at this conclusion through very careful and thoughtful consideration that's been backed by science. They said we've known that barred owls were a threat to spotted owls for a very long time. And we've done lots and lots of studies to make sure that what is happening is actually happening. And we know that barred owl removal works. So without it, we're going to lose spotted owls in Washington. And if anyone tells you anything different, it's not backed by science. Beyond spotted owls, science shows that barred owls may disrupt ecosystems, just like other invasive species. Old growth ecosystems are already threatened, and barred owls threaten to undermine the benefits that were created by old growth forest habitat protections and policies that were fought so hard for during the timber wars. We've also covered that conservation reliance can be reduced through adaptive management over time. If we don't start, we know exactly what's going to happen. But if we do start, you know, we can continue to adapt and become better at managing. Like we saw with the Kirtland's warbler, management was able to be reduced over time. And hopefully people will come up with better methods to do things. And we're already getting so much research from the removal efforts. So as with any conservation challenge, WDFW cannot do this alone. It's a shared responsibility to steward and recover Washington's native wildlife and ecosystems, and we won't get there without partner and public support. So this is a very short list of resources that you can look into, or I can send them to you. I have a lot more if you would really like to take a deep dive into this. It's just very important. And then if you have any questions, this is a fledgling that was born last year on the east side, and one of 2. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the northern spotted owl breeding program is in British Columbia, and there was a feasibility assessment that was done, almost 20 years ago, and they decided that it would be best. They were losing owls at such a fast rate to just bring them all into captivity. So they were able to, by the time they were done, they were able to bring 30 owls into captivity. And so you know, it's very difficult. Not every animal is able to be captively bred. And so it took them a long time. It took them 5 years to figure out how to hatch an egg because of their specific moisture requirements. They are not like other raptor species, it turns out. And so we have a great blueprint. We've had so much of that work done. And that's one of the reasons why I think we could be really successful with this. But yeah, so the population has gotten to the point where now they can start releasing, I don't want to call them extras, but they're owls that already have their genetics represented in the population. And so it's safe to let them go and now start this other piece of perfecting like wild release. So that's, it was, if you've read anything about other species, it's very challenging. They've had to do like predator training with like whooping cranes. They've had to do like black fly, you know, reductions with whooping cranes and stuff like that. So this piece is equally challenging. And the last release that they had in June was the largest release that they had done up to that point. And like I said, it was a celebration. We were able to go out with the Spasm Nation, whose land they were releasing the owls on. So. Sorry, did that answer your question? Okay. It's lethal removal. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The Well, the lethal removal is done with a shotgun. Yeah. So it's instant. No, so they evaluated relocating them back to the East Coast, and then there's no room for them. So it would be basically just causing a bunch of conflicts with the birds that are already there. There were concerns about disease transmission, like bringing diseases over there, and then also like disrupting the evolution that's currently happening.
So I'm curious about it's great that you mentioned the program in British Columbia and the border is political border.
Yes.
And so I'm super curious about is the same thing happening up in obviously the barred owl population
Yes.
too. So I'm just curious, what's the cooperative relationship or collaboration that's happening in British Columbia and does it how far what's the range, of the spotted owl?
Yeah, so from what we know, British Columbia is kind of the outskirts of their range, the limit, and they Canada does not have the Northwest Forest Plan, so there's been a lot of continued habitat loss up there, and then of course, I don't know if you could tell from the figure, but the barred owls came over and then they went down the coast. So British Columbia was like saturated with barred owls first. So we're looking into our future when we look at British Columbia, and the feasibility assessment was very eye-opening. It was very much like you gotta act now. These are all the things we wish we would have done and things like that. So it's been, of course, it's sad. It's like they're really successful, but I think like we need to take what they're saying very seriously. And there are no wild spotted owls in British Columbia. So they took as many as they could, yeah, into captivity when the population reached so low that it was just they were functionally extirpated. And so they are starting to release them, but like I said, it's they're tester birds. They're all males. They have GPS trackers on them. They're doing barred owl management to try to keep keep the resources open for them, keep the habitat open for them. And so, yeah, we're in tester mode. For the spotted owls, it was up in British Columbia. They Yeah, so we have been in communication with them, mostly just for like the feasibility assessment, to get some real world examples of like what would it take to have a conservation breeding program. What are some considerations? So basically, just like, if we decide to move forward with this, what can we expect? And like I said, it's been a huge resource. But we are not sending owls across the border to and from. We have sent, not we, but other states have sent owls up to their breeding program that were like not releasable. So they have like an owl, I think, from California, and they have an owl from Oregon. So, you know, it is something that would be great to facilitate because, like I said, they need genetic diversity. They said it, you know, it can take a while. It takes a lot of money to start a breeding program. So, because things are so urgent, we could have a relationship with them where we send owls and then we get owls back from them when we have barred owl free areas to release them to.
Yes. In the future.
That is in that that's in my dreams. Yeah, it's gonna be something that is going to need probably constant removals in these select areas where we want to have spotted owls. Obviously, we're not going to be removing barred owls everywhere. You know, when we talk about like being able to have both species on the landscape, we will have both species on the landscape. And you know, these exclusion areas, you know, like I said, we're already kind of learning what types of habitat get reinvaded the fastest. You know, so there's a lot that we can learn to be smarter about maybe where we decide to have these exclusion areas. I can send you that really cool paper about California and what they're doing down there with their removals. But yeah, so like I said, there's a lot of research that we could be doing to improve things if we decide to start. There is a barred owl removal program that the Yakama Nation started. So they started removals, I think this year. And you know, that's the strategy was approved in August of 2023. So it's a strategy that was approved and there's no funding for it directly. So you know, it's something that scientists have said we need to do this. Here's the strategy. Here's the environmental considerations. Here are the ethical considerations, and then it's up to entities to implement it. Oh, absolutely not. Can you imagine? People send me pictures of owls all the time, and they're like, "Is this a spotted owl?" And I'm like, "It's a great horned owl." Like, absolutely not. So the removal specialist would be, so to get a permit from the service, you need to have, there's a whole criteria that's listed in the barred owl removal strategy. And then as a removal specialist, you need to go through extensive training. And then you have to have the service approve you as a removal specialist. So nobody can go out there and just shoot owls. And nobody should go out. Had somebody asked me before, can I go out and shoot the barred owl in my backyard? Absolutely not. And like, they're still protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. This is an exception that is only allowable, heavily permitted, and in these areas where we're trying to recover spotted owls.
So, did we hear that correctly? Only Yakama Nation is only area
in Washington that is doing barred owl removal under the barred owl management strategy. There are in Oregon, the BLM is doing barred owl removals in Roseburg under the strategy. I'm not up to date on whatever other efforts are happening in other states, but there is still research that's being done. So under like scientific research permits. Yakama Nation. Mm-hmm. WDFW would like to change that, yes, because it's the only way we're going to save spotted owls in the state. So it's really just a matter of funding. And so, and then there was that effort to overturn the barred owl management strategy in the Senate that failed. So it's been pretty contentious up to this point. And so, yeah, funding is the main thing. Flammulated owls, yeah. That's a good question. That is their name. Somebody else help me. I'm drawing a blank here. What does flammulation mean? Just gonna look it up. Yeah, I think is it a color or pattern? Yeah, I mean, they kind of look like bark. It's a species, but they kind of look like bark. They're on the east side in our east side forest. They migrate up here in the summer to breed. Yeah, color and pattern. Okay, there you go. I learned something new. Frugivorous birds. Frugivorous birds are birds that eat fruit. Um, we have been in support of the Yakama Nation. They were involved in the development of the barred owl removal strategy. So that was multi-agency. Yeah, again, it's just a matter of coordination and funding. Yeah. Go ahead. U.S. Senate. So the U.S. Senate, there was a joint resolution that was proposed to, I'll probably get the terminology wrong, but basically like overturn the record of decision that makes the barred owl management strategy approved. So, and then that failed so the barred owl management strategy is still, and I don't know how to, it's still alive. Yeah. You tell me. I don't know what anyone does anymore. Why anyone does anything. I would think at least some of the arguments were ethical, and then some of them were just like, we don't want to be paying for this, but nobody's paying for it. It's not a funded strategy. So, you know, also, I think it would have been kind of unusual because it's not, again, it's not a funded program. So, you know, why is Congress involved in, you know, overturning something that one of the federal agencies put a lot of research into and consideration into? I don't know. They can. They can sometimes. So sometimes they can breed, and usually when they pair up with a barred owl. So it's a total loss of genetic material. Unfortunately, I mean, I wish it was just like creating super owls or something. There was more hybridization when there were less options, you know, like, you know, odds are good, goods are odd kind of thing. So there used when you would see the two species paired up, it would typically be like a female barred owl, because females are typically bigger than males, and then a male spotted owl. But we don't typically have hybrids in Washington anymore. Plenty of barred owls to choose from. You can log it on iNaturalist. I mean, so the removals are not happening in your backyard, and you know, it's pretty well known that they're just everywhere. So I think it is good to document wildlife on like iNaturalist or something like that, just in general. But it's not, you know, no one's going to come and take your barred owl away or anything like that. But I appreciate the thought. So try to be helpful.
Spotted owl is really here, right?
It's not here.
Barred owls in your backyard. It's not really posing a threat
to a spotted owl. No. But I mean, there is like breeding that happens, and then they expand into and they're also eating your native wildlife. They're eating your frogs and your birds and your cats. They are eating your cats. They are eating your cats. They've been found in gut contents. I think the biggest thing that you can do is advocate. Say this is something that we think is important. We think biodiversity is important in the state. We don't want to lose our only spotted owl species in the state. We don't want to potentially lose other native wildlife to this invasive species. It's really arrogant for us to think that we understand the whole ramifications of having a non-native species in the state, especially when it hasn't reached density in a lot of areas. You know, they're still packing in. So I think, yeah, just advocate and, you know, advocate for not just for barred owl removals, but also for like forest protections. We need stronger forest protections. Maybe forest protections that aren't dependent on the occupancy of an endangered species. So your question was, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So there are a number of regulations that come with developing or altering habitat that an endangered species is occupying. So we have federal rules, we have state rules as well, and like I said, there's critical habitat too that's been designated, and that's because they're endangered. So yeah, spotted owl's occupancy provides a lot of protection for old growth forests, especially on the east side. You know, we also have like marbled murrelets that are ESA and they protect old growth forests here as well. But yeah, that's, I mean, I really recommend the Oregon Public Radio Timber Wars podcast. It talks all about, you know, how spotted owls became this poster child for the timber wars. And, you know, it originally started as a conflict to save old growth.
Is there any place in the world that spotted owls are started?
Marin, California.
But that's by the day.
Yeah. So there also, you have to think like they're the least saturated, so the invasion's been going south. And they have a stable population in Marin.
I'm curious if you've looked at like federal lands, state lands, private lands, and the spotted owl distribution over those, so you kind of know where you have some control. Because I would expect, so what is that the protection status means that if you're a private land, you can't harvest, and if state land, you can't harvest, but federal policy potentially shift.
Well,
True or not true?
you can harvest on private land.
So regardless of what the census of spotted owl.
It's there. So the state rules are that so these spotted owl special emphasis areas that I told you about, you can see there's maps of them around the state, and there are more restrictive rules on harvest if your property is in a spotted owl special emphasis area. But if you're outside of that, those protections only exist during the breeding season. And so then after the breeding season, you could log it. Except for the nest tree, I think.
Is there any worry about federal?
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of uncertainty, and about I think 85% of our habitat is on federal lands. Yeah, I mean and that's what I mean, where it's like, you know, we really need better regulatory protections, and that only comes from people, you know, being loud and advocating.
Yeah, I was curious on what characteristics of the spotted owl make it a sentinel species.
So sentinel species or indicator species are those that are more sensitive to changes in the environment. So like in aquatic ecosystems, a lot of times we have like Indicator species are like caddisfly larvae, or, so you have really clean, really good oxygen in the water if you have the presence of those species. And spotted owls are the same way because they require, mature old growth forest stuff that takes like 300 years to grow. And they eat they have a small range of their diet. So they primarily eat like flying squirrels and like wood rats, and in Washington I think they primarily eat like tree voles and other areas. So that like it's better because there are less variables that are impacting the success of that species is kind of a way to think of it. Like if you have a generalist species, it's not going to be readily impacted by changes to the environment because it's just going to switch to eating other things. It's got a huge no more squirrels, eat all the frogs, no old growth, I'll just go live in your backyard. So you can't use that as an indicator species. There's also species that are sensitive, but they're too difficult to monitor. They might be too cryptic or difficult. We don't know anything about them. Insects, or like a lot of our amphibians we don't know much about. So we know a lot about spotted owls, and they're very easy to monitor. And so that's what makes them a good indicator.